Thank you. It's being recorded. Thank you everybody for showing up and taking time to meet today. This is a newly formed task force for maternal mental health and substance use disorder. We're trying to get professionals from both avenues, having the same conversation and integrating our programs and support within the community. So if you're not familiar with what one organization is doing, perhaps we can share and just educate each other through these conversations. One of the first things, I'm super excited. I feel like I've been waiting since March, maybe, to hear this presentation by Sarah. And so I'm super excited. I'll let Sarah introduce herself and kind of take it from here, but Sarah is a wonderful asset to our community as far as research goes for various programs, including Mission Motherhood. So I'm just really excited to have her share her expertise. So thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah LeBlanc, and I'm an assistant professor of communication at Purdue University Fort Wayne, and I study maternal communication really in two realms, the postpartum realm of motherhood, as well as how moms address those taboo topics with members of their family. So this presentation is based on research I am just now concluding. I finished a second draft of the second paper, or the third paper, yesterday. So I'm very excited to share these results with you and hope to see these come to fruition as publications in the next year. So I want to thank Jennifer for this invitation. And so in fall 2018, I submitted a PFW summer grant application so I could spend the summer of 2019 investigating the postpartum stage and the infant mortality rate. Specifically, I wanted to explore if there was a relationship between the amount of supportive communication a new mom seeks, the type of supportive communication she receives, and the life expectancy of her infant. Additionally, I wanted to examine why some new moms may refuse to seek support or supportive communication postpartum. As a result of the grant, I produced a solo authored chapter that examined postpartum depression storylines within situational comedies. I had 3 papers with various graduate students. 1 paper was accepted and presented at a conference. We presented the preliminary findings of our second paper at another conference, and the final paper is a brand new idea that just came to light in May. So until the fall of 2018, supportive communication focused on the prenatal period of pregnancy. As early as 2011, Anderson Dearman commented that the research looking at social support and postpartum health was absent. IRB and quantitative data collection began during the summer of 2019. We had about 214 participants in our quantitative study. Our results suggested that Caucasian American women were more likely to suffer from postpartum depression symptoms than women of other ethnicities. The annual household income is not a factor, nor were postpartum cultural differences. So while my 2 graduate students and I got a conference presentation out of this paper, that was all we were able to attest to at that time. So we moved on to our qualitative data. Between October 2019 and April 2020, we interviewed 22 moms who were between 6 weeks and 1 year of their last baby's birth. These moms came from all over the United States, including Arizona, Missouri, but most were from here in Fort Wayne. Our initial intent was twofold. We wanted to look at supportive communication and new mothers' perceptions, as well as supportive communication online. Our purpose changed, though, once we realized the mothers we interviewed did not necessarily go online for social support. So our second purpose wound up examining postpartum anxiety through a retrospective storytelling lens. Our first paper, which we titled, "I Need 10 Minutes, Postpartum Mothers and Their Perceptions of Social Support," we sought to uncover how new moms define social support, where or if they turn for social support, and what, if any, social support they receive. We did this because previous communication research determined that moms were hesitant to seek help from friends and families, and did not know who to address in the medical field for help. We sought out to understand how new moms seek social support and from whom they seek that support, since research indicates that new moms are known not to report symptoms of postpartum depression. Analysis of our data provided 4 themes: defining social support, who provides the social support, how new moms perceive they are being supported, and the impact that social support has on new moms' sense of self. Our first research question centered on who was providing support, since literature suggests that many new moms are not known to ask for help. Our data suggests that social support differs depending on whether the mom seeks support during the perinatal period or postpartum. When new moms were attending medical appointments, they found that the office staff, nurses, and doctors to be very supportive of their journey. But during the postpartum period, our data suggests that support comes from mom's inner circle, such as their partner, family members, and close friends. While inner circle was defined by our participants, the inner circle concept did not change between those moms we interviewed pre-COVID or during the COVID pandemic. The second research question sought to examine how support is communicated, but through the eyes of new moms. We found that the new moms believe support is communicated through their definition of support. So in research question 2, we asked how support was communicated, but research question 3, we sought how they defined supportive communication. So we concluded that new mothers would define social support as any act of service which supported the well-being of the new family unit, particularly mother and baby. These acts included financial support, manual support, and communicative support. Our fourth research question addressed how they perceive the messages of support impacting their sense of self. We found negative and positive impact of these messages. Specifically, new moms experience low levels of self when they perceive the messages as making them invisible or inadequate. These low levels of self-support support previous research that points out how new moms don't seek out support because of the stigma behind asking for help, and it compromises their maternal identity. Our participants found that when supportive comments sounded like blemishes, their maternal identity was compromised. Perhaps, I'm not such a good mom. In a few of the transcripts, I had a chance to ask, so how many asked, how are you, mom? And we found that very few moms were asked this question. This lack of communication, as well as the communication of stopping by to just see the baby, led to low self-esteem as new moms felt invisible. So when supportive communication normalized or moms felt like they were part of a community, their sense of self was high. The feelings of in this alone dissipated as other new moms shared their experiences, or even when moms were able to compare and contrast their babies with each other's. So during these periods, moms no longer felt invisible or inadequate since others had been there. So for the second paper that I just finished yesterday, 2 graduate students who were not familiar with the project coded the data. As such, they saw stuff in the data that the other team and I did not see. So we took their findings to develop the second paper, which we are still working on a title for. So the purpose of this second project was to investigate how new mothers communicate about the manifestation of their postpartum anxiety. We draw upon the communicative narrative sense-making theory to investigate how new mothers communicate about the postpartum stage and their mental health. Specifically, we are interested in how new mothers communicate to make sense of their experience during the postpartum period. This time, we only asked 2 research questions. So we set out to, first research question was, what does the narrating of a new mother's postpartum experience say about a new mother's well-being? And how does retrospective storytelling describe how postpartum anxiety impacts a new mother postpartum? We determined that the postpartum stage is a time of stress. They are fearful of judgment, and there's a lot of self-blame going on. This occurs because postpartum anxiety hangs like a cloud over the new mother's heads as they internally and externally struggle against society's narrative of the perfect mother. They try to bond with their child as well as maintain relationships with others. Unlike previous research grounded in the communication narrative sense-making theory, our study is unique in that it brought to light the negative aspect of the postpartum stage through storytelling. One researcher admitted that no one told her of the negative things or feelings to expect once coming home with a newborn from the hospital. Our participants' experiences supported this researcher's claim, and in doing so, their narratives stressed the need to provide new mothers a space to be able to share the negativity surrounding their health and well-being during the postpartum period. Koenig Kellis, the originator of CNSM, reiterates how storytelling is good for an individual's health and well-being, but by silencing mothers or dismissing their concerns postpartum, the not telling of their stories contributes to the negative aspects of their health and well-being. Next, we found that retrospective storytelling had our new mothers putting a lot of blame on themselves. This came through in 3 sub-themes: lack of preparation, mom guilt, and experiencing anxiety building and judgmental thoughts. Many first-time mothers experience anxiety because they are not prepared to be a mother. Second, our study captured the experiences of others experiencing that mom guilt. And we found that participants feel guilty when they don't think they are living up to society's definitions of motherhood. Finally, new mothers feel judged. Many new mothers spent a lot of time doubting their behaviors and choices. So as outsiders, we must be respectful and let them mother. In telling their stories, the new mothers, with a few exceptions, captured how their partners were supportive. They contributed to the health and well-being of the spousal committed relationship. But not the same can be said about other relationships present during the postpartum stage. The retrospective stories shared by our participants highlight the negative messages received from others, such as friends, family outside of their spouse, and the medical provider. When family is there just because there is a new baby, new mothers find them unsupportive and invading of their space. To have relationships be described as healthy and beneficial during that stage, others need to be wary of how they do or don't invade the mother's space and how they phrase good advice or compliments. Our study found that while everyone loves a compliment, visitors need to pay attention to what they say as well as how they say it. Our participants found some of the remarks to be insulting. So we suggest that future research should collect and examine these postpartum comments from others to decipher how these messages can decode as negative or positive. Understanding the self-inflicted pressure to live up to the narrative of a perfect mother and that nothing is wrong leaves many new mothers trapped with fear. So we need to praise our new mothers even if they don't live up to our individual expectations. We also need to push for new mothers' voices to be heard during medical appointments. Historically, women's medical problems have been linked to the uterus or to depression. So in today's world, with new mothers experience anxiety and depression as a result of growing a human in their uterus, perhaps it's time for us to take their complaints seriously. Thank you. I am now open for questions.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you so much. One of the things that really struck me was how just our moms are not prepared, how we are not prepared. Like we believe we're prepared, we're told we're prepared, and we're not prepared, like in any way. And then you have to go back when you become a mom and say, well, you have to admit that you're not prepared. So everyone told you you're not prepared. You think you are, and then you have to go back and be like, wait, no, I don't know what I'm doing. And so that's a really big part, or I'm assuming that that is a big reason as well why it's harder to ask for help, because we thought we had it under control. But that was an illusion. So that was just something that stuck with me. Do you guys have any questions for Sarah?
I have a question. It's Liz. Hi. Great presentation, Sarah. Thank you so much for that information. I am interested in the diversity part of that. Did you do any racial, like this percentage were white mothers, this were Black mothers, Burmese?
1 second, as I pull up my methods section, I kind of skipped over that. With 22 moms, a majority of them were Caucasian. We had a few Asian mothers. Yeah, 90% of our participants were white, and it was very hard to even get those 22 participants that we did get. I didn't think it would be so hard. I was once challenged on a paper because new mothers are everywhere, but not all new mothers are willing to share their stories. So we would like to do this again with a more diverse population of new mothers.
I wondered if that would make a difference in some of those responses, but because some of those cultures are closed anyway to, outside researchers or people asking questions, I wondered how many you were able to grab. So thank you.
Do you know of any specific comments that were made to the moms that they took critically in the postpartum period?
Yes, I did put those into a paper. Let's see. A lot of it went on how they decoded the messages. So when participants heard, "So how is the baby?" or "I just wanted to stop by to see the baby," or even "I wanted to check on the baby," they felt like the baby was getting all the attention and no one cared how the mom was doing. Those were three that stood out in the first paper. Let me see if I can bring up the second one really. That's not it. One second, Michelle, I'm sorry.
I'm glad Liz asked that question though, because that was one of my questions. The way the results showed that Caucasian women were more apt to have mood changes. That surprised me because there's a lot of research that shows the other cultures have more. So thank you.
We did have more Asian mothers in our quantitative study than we did in our qualitative study. So they provided comments that in many of their cultures, the mom of the new mother moves in for the first 6 months. So they have in the house on hand support, whereas in other cultures, that is not the case. So, but to go to your original question, comments like "you're doing great" or "you got this" help the participants feel better about their mother's skills. But other things where like when people would say, "Oh, you look great for a pregnant woman," the new moms to be would get tense in a way because they're wondering, is my baby on the small side? Is she not growing enough? Or even "just put your baby to sleep and just let him just lay him down so you don't have to nurse him to sleep. Don't do that. He's going to get too attached to you," or X, Y, and Z. So when they were given unsolicited advice, they felt as if what they were doing to keep their baby safe and healthy and happy wasn't good enough for the person providing the comments.
Interesting.
Were you able to take into account new moms or hormonal anyway? I mean, on top of just giving birth and feeling inadequate and all that, was there a way to filter? Sometimes if you make a comment and then the mom will just, like, the comment will be like, "Oh, they're just being too sensitive," or
we didn't measure hormones. There are
okay.
communication professors or researchers mainly on the West Coast that have the capability to measure hormones for their various studies, but that is not something I'm trained in. So I didn't explore that avenue. Should researchers come to me in the future and say, "Hey, you want to add this biological component," I'm all for it, but it's not something I can do without the assistance of others.
And then just one more question. Was it C-section or natural?
We didn't ask that
Okay.
question. We just wanted new mothers
Just
between
new
6
mothers.
weeks and 1 year.
Okay, thank you.
Did you notice a difference in how the new moms perceived feedback if the support person was sharing personal experience. So instead of saying that child will get too attached to you, if they said something like, oh, when I did that with my first child, I had a really hard time getting her to go to sleep without nursing for like a year.
When they have those little anecdotes attached to their comments, the mothers felt more supportive and felt like, oh, yay, somebody else has been through this. But when it was just like throwaway lines, like, are you sure you don't nap when the baby naps? Then the moms felt that they were being judged. So if you go more into detail when you make a comment to a new mother, they're more likely to empathize with what you're saying and feel supportive. Whereas if you don't, they're more likely to perceive that message as being a blemish or a backhanded compliment.
Okay, thank you.
And Sarah, I know you're very well versed on all of this. Was there anything that really shocked you from your results?
Well, I will say that the second paper, what my two graduate coders found, or how they coded the data, shocked me, because we went in with just postpartum depression. I've never heard of postpartum anxiety, and it turns out in the like the nursing or midwifery journals that I pulled articles from, they say that postpartum anxiety is often umbrellaed under postpartum depression. So if the anxiety goes untreated, will this lead to more severe bouts of postpartum depression? We were lucky that we didn't have any mothers who went above and beyond what we could handle in our interviews. So we didn't have any of those Susan Smiths or the woman from Texas in the early 2000s. So it did shock me that our participants also didn't participate a lot in mom groups online, because I thought every mother did that at some point, but it turns out not every new mother does.
That's interesting too, because I think a lot of new mothers, or, maybe Michelle, you can speak to this as well, but when you talk to a mom who's a few years out and you talk about support groups, or would that have been helpful for you? They're like, oh yeah, I would have loved to go to a support group. But when they're in the middle of it, or when they're, have so many other things going on, it's just not something, it feels to me that it's not something they feel comfortable with unless they're really supported in that decision.
Something that did come up, Michelle, that did shock me, because it made me think of my own situation 7 years ago, was if your anxiety or depression is too high, according to one of the researchers, it impacts your breast milk. And I'm wondering if that's what happened when my eldest was diagnosed with failure to thrive. If I was too nervous or anxious because we had just moved, I started a new job, my father was sick, if that influenced how my body was producing the breast milk.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's a lot of stress to go through with a new baby. So I wonder if you're just such a strong person that the stress didn't really come to light until you were head underwater,
Right.
with so much stress. Yeah. I think it's scary going to a support group too, because you don't know who's going to be there, and who, by walking in the door, are you saying, I'm questioning myself, or I may relate to this stigma. But it doesn't happen often, but every now and then people will know somebody when they walk in. But it normally turns out to be a good thing, because they know that person's not crazy either. And if they're here, yeah.
Would you have any suggestions for providers or people who are working with, just postpartum moms in general, about how we communicate with them, or how we can help prepare them to be a mom, so that they don't, it's not such a cliff that they fall off once they actually become a mom and feel like they don't have support?
I'm not gonna judge the classes here in Fort Wayne, because I never took any of the maternity classes here in Fort Wayne. But when my husband and I took the Parents to Be class when we lived in South Carolina, the woman's language was very much directed towards the dads, as if the dads or fathers to be had no idea how to be a dad, and nothing was directed towards the moms. And this, for many of us, this was our first babies. That's why we're attending this class. So maybe separate out have a new parents class, but then have additional mom and dad classes, because I wasn't prepared for all the hormone swings. And my recovery was different from others because I had a cesarean, whereas other friends had had vaginal births. So even just explaining that to us would be helpful. Postpartum, we keep arguing that we see the pediatrician more than we see our primary care physician or our OB during the postpartum year. So I am a big proponent in both papers near the implication sections of advocating for that intra-care model, working with pediatric offices to train the nurses and the pediatricians on what to look for. Because if you keep asking me, so how is mom doing? I'm gonna just keep saying fine. So different ways to ask the same question where we're not gonna respond with just the word fine.
Traditionally, it's about 10% of our delivering families that take prenatal classes. So a lot of people aren't getting that education from a formal place. But I am going to pass along that I've never heard that before, that your experience and how it affected you.
I'm reading this book called You're Doing It the Wrong Way by, the last names are Quinlan and Johnson. And they mentioned in the part I read yesterday that OBGYN care has only been around since like the 1970s. So these classes in a way are only about 50 years old. And prior to 1970, women were just expected to know how to do labor in their own homes and wherever, which kind of made me grateful that I wasn't born before 1970.
Did take classes in Fort Wayne, prenatal classes, but I feel like I was prepared for the physical pieces of post-labor. You know, you're going to be exhausted. This is how you change a diaper. You know, the differences between, you know, breastfeeding and bottle feeding and the potentials for nipple confusion and things like that. Never once did they say, hey, you might sit and cry for a whole day. Or, you know, you might have attachment issues. The mental health piece was not addressed at all.
I would say it's about 1% of our delivering population that will take our mood changes in mom's prenatal class.
But Michelle, not every facility offers a class like that.
I know.
And that would be a great class to make universal across all maternity wards.
It's on Eventbrite. So even people from out of town can attend.
I think that even if the language, so much of it to me is surrounding around language, and that's what I heard from the research too, is just the approach that we use with women. Like, I think that some things that we do here at A Mother's Hope were definitely supported in what Sarah said, like just talking about, you know, like the emotional side of it and what to expect. And recognizing that it's going to be really, really, really hard, but that doesn't mean that you can't do it. And I think just even, it doesn't have to be, you know, the complicated language, but just approaching it in a really simple way, that being a mom is the hardest thing you're ever going to do. And even just saying that, we see it, you know, you see a difference in people go, oh, okay, well, that's why this is so hard, because it is hard, and it's hard for everybody on different levels, but it's really hard. I don't think there's many of us as moms that would say, oh yeah, that's the easiest thing I've ever done, any of it. And it really doesn't necessarily get easier either. But if you're not going to be prepared for it, and recognizing that no matter what you do, you're not going to probably feel completely prepared, and that's okay. And that putting people around you that will be supportive and that you can have those really hard conversations with, that those are the kinds of goals and things to talk about. And how do you find those people? And maybe it is, you know, you go to the support groups. Maybe you're not a person that feels comfortable in that. So how do you find that one person that you can say, I just sat and cried for a whole day, and I don't know what to do. Is that okay? And somebody that will, speak kindly to you in that moment. How do you find those people? Because I think that's the key, having the supportive people, the supportive person, whether they're an online, like you said, Sarah, of do you seek that out in a group, or do you seek that out person to person, whatever. I just feel like that's really important. If we had a way to get that language to not just medical, because I think medical, like you said, you're not even really seeing them, but just as women, as we're doing that, if we're more aware of it and educating other women that we're around, I think that's really, really how women get stuff done.
It's interesting. It's really awesome that you mentioned that too, because when I was kind of first having these conversations, a lot of why, or it seemed why postpartum wasn't being addressed, like mental health was not being addressed, because they didn't want to scare a new mom. And that's not, never a good reason, because there is a way to be supportive of a mother prenatally and not scare her about what's about to happen. So just even being honest, and I love the concept of sharing stories, because again, from like my own birthing story, I was terrified to share with anybody because I thought I would scare everyone off. But really, everyone has their own, intensive birth story. So it's just the more we normalize communicating what birth and motherhood really looks like, the more we can help these new moms find the words and the safe spaces to share their own experience.
And a lot of the messages that new moms have received in the past have come from television or movies. And 2 reports came out in 2012 about how postpartum depression was seen in like reality shows as well as dramas. And only those who were in a coma when they gave birth, or whose baby was stolen from their womb as part of the storyline, seemed to have the severe postpartum depression. They never talked about it as a normal person disease. What I noticed when I produced the chapter on the situational comedies is that more women were entering the writer's room by that time. So women were able to use their own experiences with postpartum depression and tie those into the storyline seen in these shows that I analyzed, which made a big difference between the reports that came out in 2012 and my chapter that just came out 2 months ago. So.
Sarah, can I share that chapter to
Yes.
everyone? Okay,
Mhm.
so I will send out that for everybody as well.
I also have found that, sorry, my phone's ringing. People aren't always able to absorb information. For example, when you're pregnant and people tell you about the sleep deprivation, about the, how this is going to change your life. And, it's a difficult job being a parent. I just had a mom in my office and I asked her what took you by surprise the most about becoming a mom. She said, the constant needs of my baby. She said, I just figured I would lay the baby down and I would have a couple hours to myself. And I said, yeah. She said, people told me about it, but I just didn't think it would be that way for me. And I think just hormonal changes and depression, anxiety can be the same. Like it's so easy to say, well, that won't happen to me. So when they're in it, that's when they're ready to listen. They're like, oh gosh, that's a big deal.
So that was kind of where I was going. How do we reach the moms that are prenatal who aren't in it yet and think that everything's going to be great? They're going to have a new baby to love, and they have some support that feels supportive, but you don't know how that feels after the baby. Like, how do we reach those moms who think that I don't need help right now?
One of the participants wished that something had come up in one of the birthing classes, because in the birthing class that she took, it was all positive, and she really would have loved it if someone said, okay, you may have some bad days. You're never going to be able to use the bathroom by yourself for the next 5 years. Like those little things to prepare, just prepare them, not scare them, but just make them aware that these are possibilities.
I think you bring up a key point that when it is addressed, we will have much happier mothers and families.
So Sarah, I'm looking at your, some of my notes I was taking, and I'm always looking for practical applications to use some of this new knowledge. As Michelle pointed out, a pretty small percent of moms are going to classes. I think right now in Allen County, we probably have a bigger percentage who are getting some sort of home visiting service. And I'm wondering, you know, first of all, decreasing the stigma of mental health is always a challenge. If there are even some one-pagers that, you know, like myths about what you see in the media, on TV and in movies about postpartum depression compared to what it's really like. Just to kind of give maybe moms some, I don't, multiple touch points if we can reach them before. So it's something that we're talking about, and then also having an opportunity to share with them, because Mom, we care about you. And it sounds like your study also supported a phrase that I've heard before, a mom describing postpartum, how she felt that she was the candy wrapper, the baby was the candy, and then once the baby was born, she was like that candy wrapper, just discarded. And it sounds kind of like that's exactly what you were getting as well. Everybody's interested in the baby, nobody cares about me. So just any multiple, what could we do to have multiple touch points with Mom prenatally to prepare her that not scary, but even if we can use some humor, perhaps. I don't know if there's any support of, you know, our pop, you know, like pop culture references of this is what, you know, these TVs and, you know, TV shows, movies show, but here's what it was really like. I don't know. I guess I'm just, you gave a lot of good information. It's going to take me a little bit to process it all.
And I'll be happy to send you my condensed notes because I just cut and pasted from my paper. But for now, you can recommend Blackish from October 2017.
That's good.
Bo had just had baby number 5, and that's what actually kicked me off on wanting to do that study. Is her press for that episode. And even reading them later, she said they make it real. Like it, when I watched that episode, I could see some of the stuff that I went through. So that is actually a good episode to start mothers with. The title is in the chapter that Jennifer is going to send you. And you mentioned touch points. I'm thinking infographics that can show, hey, this show says this research says this, so I can break it down. I can work with my graduate students and perhaps break all this down into infographics and then send them to you for feedback and then distribution. So anything I can do I'm all about engaging now with the community with my findings. So anything I can do to get these findings out there, I am very willing to do.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Oh, sorry. And Sarah, I'm even thinking like of instructions for community members on how to talk to a new mom. You know, you might think you're being supportive when you're doing these things, but here are some things that are actually really helpful. And this is, you know, and we, you know, I would love to write like a Parkview blog post about it. That, you know, a researcher here and, you know, and mention your study. And I don't know like what your publication, so you're gonna have to help me with that. But here are some, you know, in our own backyard, things of how we can talk to women in our community. I think it does help too when it is a homegrown effort where it's not somebody out in California doing this. This is right here that is, you know, affecting our community. I think that makes a difference.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Erin, because I think you have a big opportunity to help support our mamas as well. Is there anyone who, are there any other questions or comments? I love this conversation because we are also sharing our own experience. It's helpful all the way around. But are there any any other questions or comments? Awesome. So it looks like Sarah just gave her email in the chat, and I will go ahead and send everyone a copy of the recording today, as well as the chapter that was published. So Sarah, I so appreciate you sharing your study with us, and look forward to working with you in the future as well, and just helping to engage in this conversation surrounding maternal mental health, because as we all know, we have a long way to go here. So I appreciate it very much.
Again, thank you, Jennifer, for asking me. Thank you to all of you who attended. It was my hope that I would be able to share these results in our community. And as they get published, if you would like me to come talk to your membership, I will be happy to do that. Just send me a email.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming. We will have another meeting probably in September with an important topic and speaker. So stay tuned for that. And if you guys don't mind, and if there's publications and information that come out regarding maternal mental health and substance use disorder, I don't want to fill up all your emails, but I can. So we'll be making sure to send some more studies and information on that as well to keep the conversation going. So, all right. Well, thank you everyone, and have a wonderful day and wonderful summer, and we'll see you in September.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.